Clara Hayes is 32 years old. She owns three artisan bakery locations in Raleigh's bustling commercial district. The air in her flagship store always smells of warm cinnamon and toasted sugar. She was in her kitchen this afternoon measuring flour for a new sourdough recipe. Her phone sat on the stainless steel counter beside a scattering of poppy seeds. The screen suddenly lit up with a harsh, insistent glow. 29 missed calls blinked at her from an area code she recognized instantly. It was the one from her childhood home. Her stomach tightened into a hard, cold knot. Her hands, dusted with flour, froze above the mixing bowl. The number was not saved in her contacts. It was her mother's number. She had deleted it years ago. A wave of ice water seemed to rush through her veins. She felt the familiar, heavy weight settle in her chest. This was the area code from the place where she learned what it meant to be unseen. This was the place where she was taught that her worth was always conditional. This was the place where she discovered how easily love could be withheld. From the outside, the Hayes family looked perfect. Their home stood on a tree-lined street with manicured lawns. Green shutters framed every window, white hydrangeas bloomed in neat rows by the front porch. Father was a respected regional manager for a large insurance firm. Mother volunteered at the local church and ran the annual bake sale. They were pillars of their community. Neighbors often commented on their beautiful daughters, Clara and Amelia. Clara, the quiet, artistic one, was always drawing in a corner. Amelia, 2 years older, was a bright, outgoing child, always at the center of attention. Every Christmas, their house was the brightest on the block, twinkling lights draped over every bush. A giant inflatable Santa stood in the front yard. Carolers often stopped by their door. People always said the Hayes girls were so lucky. They had such a wonderful family. The reality inside the house felt different. I remember one summer day when I was 8 years old. The air was thick and humid. The scent of cut grass hung heavy outside my bedroom window. I had spent hours drawing a detailed picture of our house. I added little birds on the roof and bright flowers in the garden. I used all my new colored pencils. I carried it carefully downstairs to the kitchen. Mother was kneading dough on the large marble island. Amelia sat at the table, humming a tune as she braided colorful friendship bracelets. I held out my drawing to my mother. "Look what I made," I said, my voice soft. Mother glanced down at the paper. Her fingers did not stop their rhythmic work with the dough. She said, "That's nice, Clara. Did you finish your arithmetic homework?" My shoulders slumped. A familiar ache started behind my eyes. I looked at Amelia. Her bracelets always got oohs and ahs. My drawing was just nice. I crumpled the paper slightly in my hand. I walked back upstairs. The image of the bright, colorful house felt faded and dull. This taught me that my efforts were only ever acceptable, never celebrated. By the time I was 12, the pattern was deeply etched. I stood in the school auditorium, my palms sweating. The sixth grade science fair projects filled every available surface. My volcano model, built from papier-mâché and painted in meticulous detail, stood tall on its display board. I had stayed up late for weeks, researching tectonic plates and chemical reactions. The baking soda and vinegar lava flow was perfectly timed. Mother and father walked past my project without stopping. Their steps took them directly to Amelia's display. She had built a simple solar system mobile. Its planets were painted in bright primary colors. Mother beamed at Amelia. "Amelia, darling, it's truly wonderful," she said, her voice full of pride. Father clapped Amelia on the shoulder. "Our little astrophysicist," he joked loudly. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. I watched them from across the room. I felt a hollow space open up in my stomach. The smell of vinegar from my volcano suddenly made me feel sick. No one stopped at my project. Not once did they look at my carefully crafted volcano. Not once did they ask me about the hours I spent on it. I understood then that their praise was reserved for someone else. The years leading up to my departure only solidified this truth. I was 18. I had just received my acceptance letter to the state university. It was a good school, a reputable program for design. I wanted to study graphic arts. I walked into the living room, letter clutched tight in my hand. Mother and father were discussing Amelia's recent promotion at her marketing job. She had been with the company for only 2 years. "Can you believe it, Robert?" "A manager already," Mother said, her voice light with admiration. Father nodded. "She always was so driven." I cleared my throat. "I got into state," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. Mother turned her head slowly. She looked at the letter in my hand. "Oh, that's nice, Clara," she said. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "But are you sure about art school? You know how competitive that field is." Amelia always had such a practical head on her shoulders. Father grunted in agreement. My hand started to tremble. My chest felt squeezed tight as if a heavy weight pressed down on it. The glossy acceptance letter suddenly felt flimsy and worthless. I had tried so hard to prove my worth. Every single achievement I presented was met with a caveat. Every milestone was used to measure me against Amelia. I stopped expecting them to see me. I stopped expecting their approval altogether. The final incident unfolded on Christmas Eve, just after my 22nd birthday. The house was a spectacle of festive cheer. Fairy lights draped over every surface. The scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. There was a large family gathering. Aunts, uncles, cousins all squeezed into the living room. Amelia sat on the floor, surrounded by a pile of beautifully wrapped gifts. Father laughed loudly at one of her jokes. Mother passed her another glass of eggnog. I sat by the window seat, a book open on my lap. The book was a shield. No one had spoken to me for nearly an hour. No one noticed my quiet presence. Dinner was announced. A lavish spread covered the dining room table: roast turkey, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole. Mother called everyone to the table. Come on, everyone, find a seat, she chirped happily. I stood up, preparing to join the bustling crowd. Mother caught my eye, her smile wavered for a moment. She walked over to me, her voice dropped, becoming a low, private murmur. Clara, darling, she began, her tone gentle yet firm. Do you do me a favor? We have so many people tonight. The table is quite full. Perhaps you could sit in the kitchen just for tonight. It would really help me out. You can still hear everything. My breath caught in my throat. The words hit me like a physical blow. My vision blurred slightly. The festive lights around me seemed to dim. The laughter from the dining room became a distant, muffled roar. My stomach twisted with a sharp, burning pain. The warmth of the room suddenly felt like an oppressive heat. I could not speak, I could not move. I simply stared at her. Her expression remained calm, almost placid. She offered a small, reassuring pat on my arm. She turned and walked back towards the dining room. Her red velvet dress swished as she moved. The heavy, sweet scent of gingerbread wafted from the kitchen. I stood there for a long moment, my hands clenched into fists, my knuckles turned white, my face felt hot, my cheeks burned with a deep, humiliating flush. The sound of happy chatter filled the room. I could hear Amelia's bright, clear laugh. I could hear Father telling a story. No one noticed that I was still standing in the living room doorway. No one noticed the way my heart was pounding against my ribs. I walked into the kitchen. The tile floor felt cold beneath my thin slippers. I sat down at the small breakfast nook table. A single plate was set there, a slice of turkey, a scoop of potatoes, a spoon of green beans. It looked like an afterthought. I picked up my fork. My hand trembled so badly I could not hold it steady. I put the fork down. I could not eat. I could not pretend. I sat there in the quiet kitchen. The muffled sounds of the family feast reached me. They were celebrating without me. They had always celebrated without me. This was not a moment. This was the conclusion. This was the final, undeniable proof. This was the moment I realized I had to leave. I packed a small duffel bag in the pre-dawn silence. The house was dark and still. Every step I took creaked on the old wooden floorboards. I wrote a short, impersonal note. I placed it on my bed. It simply said I was moving out. I walked down the stairs. The air was cold and heavy with the scent of pine. I reached the front door. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. My chest felt hollow and empty. There was no one to say goodbye to. There was nothing left to say. I opened the door. The cold December air bit at my exposed skin. I stepped out onto the porch. I closed the door softly behind me. The click of the latch echoed in the quiet morning. I turned. I did not look back at the house. I walked to my beat-up sedan parked a block away. The engine coughed twice before sputtering to life. I drove away from the street where I had spent my entire life. The houses with their twinkling lights began to shrink in my rearview mirror. The inflatable Santa became a distant, blurry shape. I drove until the city limits sign disappeared behind me. I drove until the sun began to paint the sky in hues of soft pink and orange. I drove until I felt a strange, unsettling quiet settle over me. It was the quiet of starting over. 10 years passed after that morning. 10 years of complete and utter silence. Not a single phone call, not an email, not a text message. Nothing. I moved to Raleigh. I found a tiny studio apartment. It was on the third floor of an old building. The rent was cheap. The windows rattled in the wind, the paint peeled in the corners. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to make ends meet. I cleaned offices in the evenings. I waited tables on weekends. During the day, I took baking classes at a community college. My hands ached every night from kneading dough and scrubbing floors. My feet throbbed from standing for 12-hour shifts. There were nights I cried into my pillow. The loneliness was a physical weight on my chest. I wondered if I had made the right choice. I questioned my own strength. One morning I sat at my small kitchen table. The electricity bill lay open beside a cup of lukewarm coffee. The number felt impossibly high. I had exactly $17 in my bank account. I thought about quitting. I thought about calling. I closed my eyes. I pushed the thought away. I got up. I started mixing a batch of sourdough starter. Stopping was not an option. Stopping was the one thing I would not allow myself to do. The first milestone arrived 3 years later. I walked into a small, empty storefront. It was in a quiet neighborhood a few blocks off a main road. The paint was peeling. The windows were grimy, but the space felt right. It smelled faintly of old wood and possibilities. My commercial lease agreement lay on the scarred countertop. The landlord, a kind, older woman named Mrs. Henderson, waited patiently. My hand trembled as I uncapped my pen. This was it. This was the leap. This was the moment I committed everything. I remembered the kitchen table from Christmas Eve. I remembered the feeling of being an afterthought. I wanted to create a place of warmth. I wanted to bake things that brought people joy. I signed my name. The ink felt permanent and brave. A deep, quiet tremor ran through me. This was no longer just a dream. This was real. 5 years after that, my name appeared in print. A local magazine, Raleigh Living, ran a feature on new small businesses. My bakery named Sweet Hearth was prominently featured. The article highlighted my artisan sourdough and my delicate pastries. The photograph showed me smiling, standing behind a display case filled with cinnamon rolls. The smell of cinnamon always brought a tiny, wistful ache to my chest. It reminded me of cold Christmas mornings, but now it was a scent of my own making. I held the glossy magazine in my hands. My fingers traced the words. Clara Hayes, founder and head baker. My name, not Amelia's, not a comparison to anyone else, it was just mine. A quiet sense of pride settled over me. It was not loud or boastful. It was a deep, steady warmth, like fresh bread from the oven. The third milestone came just last year. I sat across from my accountant, a meticulous man named Mr. Davies. He pushed a printed report across his desk. Clara, he said, his voice even. Your third location is performing exceptionally well. Based on these projections, your total assets have surpassed the number you discussed with me when we first met. I looked down at the paper. The numbers blurred for a moment. I remembered a tattered notebook from years ago. I had scrawled a financial goal inside it, a figure that felt impossibly large back then. I had written it down one night, sitting at my tiny kitchen table in the studio apartment. I wanted to prove to myself that I could create something substantial. I wanted to build a foundation that no one could take away. I reached down, my fingers touched the cool, smooth surface of the wooden table, my shoulders dropped an inch. I realized I had been holding them up for years. The goal was no longer a dream, it was simply a fact. The insistent buzzing of my phone continued. The screen glowed with another missed call, 29 calls. It was still my mother's number. I took a deep breath. My hands, still lightly dusted with flour, remained still. I stared at the phone. My heart began to pound a steady rhythm in my chest. I knew this day would come. It had always been a quiet certainty. I picked up the phone. I pressed the power button. The screen went dark. The silence in my bakery kitchen felt profound. A few days later, a heavy knock sounded on the front door of my flagship bakery. It was just after closing time. The streetlights outside cast long shadows. I was wiping down the display cases. My apron was covered in a fine layer of powdered sugar. I recognized the silhouette through the frosted glass. My stomach tightened, a familiar clenching sensation. I walked slowly to the door. I unlocked the deadbolt. I pulled the heavy glass door open. My mother stood on the sidewalk. She wore a tailored wool coat. Her hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. Her lips were painted a bright, confident red. Amelia stood beside her. Amelia wore a stylish business suit. Her expression was carefully neutral. Her eyes, however, held a glint of something I could not quite place. Mother's gaze swept over the warm, inviting interior of my bakery. The scent of cinnamon and coffee filled the air. Her eyes lingered on the framed magazine article on the wall. Her voice, when she finally spoke, sounded different. It was softer than I remembered. There was a subtle tremor in it. "Clara," she said, her voice caught slightly. "You didn't return my calls." My blood remained calm. My hands did not shake. My body felt perfectly still. "No, I did not," I replied. My voice was even. It was steady. Mother stepped inside. Amelia followed. The door swung shut behind them. The quiet of the bakery deepened. Mother folded her hands in front of her. Her gaze finally settled on my face. "We need to talk," she said. Amelia shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her eyes darted around the room. "Amelia has been having some trouble at work," Mother explained. Her voice was laced with a carefully constructed worry. "Her company is restructuring. They are downsizing significantly. Her marketing position has been eliminated." My gaze met Amelia's. Her eyes dropped quickly. She would not meet my stare. "She's been trying to pivot," Mother continued, a small, pleading note entering her tone. "She wants to start her own business, a catering company. She's wonderful at entertaining. Always has been, but she needs an initial investment and some guidance. You've done so well for yourself, Clara. You've built this empire." Her hand swept vaguely towards my display cases. The irony was a bitter, sharp taste in my mouth. They needed something from me, something I had built from nothing, something they had never believed I could achieve. I walked to the small table in the corner of the bakery. It was usually where customers enjoyed their coffee and pastries. I picked up a small, framed photograph. It was of me, a much younger version, standing proudly beside my small volcano project at the science fair. I placed it gently on the table between us. I did not raise my voice. I did not speak of the past. I simply held their gaze. I pulled a folded piece of paper from the back pocket of my apron. It was yellowed with age. The creases were worn soft. I unfolded it carefully. It was a short note. It was from Mother. She had slipped it under my bedroom door years ago, the day after the Christmas Eve incident. It read in her neat, looping script, "Clara, it's best if you stay out of the way. We need to focus on Amelia right now. She has so much potential." I placed the note on the table right beside the photograph. I smoothed it with my palm. The paper felt fragile beneath my fingertips. My voice was a calm, quiet statement. "What has changed?" The silence that followed was absolute. The soft hum of the refrigeration unit was the only sound in the room. Mother's perfectly made-up face drained of all color. Her mouth, previously a confident red, became a thin, pale line. Her eyes, which had been darting around the room, fixed on the crumpled note, they widened almost imperceptibly. Amelia's expression, carefully neutral moments before, fractured. Her lips parted slightly. A small gasp escaped her. She took an involuntary step back. Her hands, which had been loosely clasped in front of her, dropped to her sides. They hung there limp and still. The scent of cinnamon, usually so comforting, now seemed almost suffocating in the sudden stillness. I looked down at my own hands. They were steady, they were strong, they had built this place, they had made a life from nothing. There was no tremor, there was no pain, there was only a deep, quiet calm. I looked back at my mother. Her eyes were clouded with something I could not name. Her carefully composed facade had finally crumbled. She had nothing to say. Cruelty is not discipline, even when it is delivered in a calm voice. Favoritism is not love, even when it is called protection. Silence is not forgiveness, simply because the words are never spoken aloud. Real family requires genuine presence. Real family demands unwavering support. Real love means seeing another person as they are, not as a reflection of your own needs. It means celebrating their triumphs without comparison. It means comforting their failures without judgment. It means building them up, not pushing them aside. You are allowed to leave the places that diminish you. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself. You are allowed to build a life of worth without asking for anyone's blessing. You are allowed to protect the peace that took years to construct. Some gardens can only bloom when they are replanted in different soil.